If you look above the front entrance of the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C., you'll see the inscription, "Equal Justice Under Law." But does that hold true? The Supreme Court is part of the judicial branch of the US government. The court consists of 9 justices and is meant to serve as a guardian of the Constitution. SCOTUS gets to choose which cases it hears and has the power to strike down laws it sees as unconstitutional. This means the court gets to decide on issues affecting the daily lives of millions of people in the US, including election lawsuits, like deciding whether or not to allow an extension on counting mail-in ballots in key battleground states, or deciding on potential contested elections that may come its way. Appointing justices to the court has often been a political tug-of-war, but
over the past few years, we've seen a rapid politicalization of the Supreme Court. There are serious issues facing its legitimacy.
This is another episode of our series looking at you versus the system. Today, we're going to look at the ideological battle taking place over how to interpret the Constitution and whether people in the US can put their faith in the highest court to safeguard democracy.
That's really the problem with the institution, is that it's stacked with originalists who kind of are in the same mindset as our framers were 230 years ago.
Getting a justice onto the Supreme Court may seem pretty straightforward on paper. The US President nominates someone, the Senate then confirms or rejects them. But there are already several issues here. First, the Senate is another institution that is hardly representative of the US population. And if you want to know more about that, there's a whole explainer that you can watch. Secondly, voters don't actually directly elect Supreme Court justices.
The president nominates someone, and the senators that we elect directly are the ones who actually vote on the Supreme Court justice. So it's an indirect democracy, and that was set up deliberately because we have an indirect form of democracy with the Electoral College, we have direct democracy with electing our legislators, and then we have the Supreme Court, which is sort of the people we elect are the ones who help decide.
Justices can only be removed if they are impeached, but that's very rare. It's happened just once since the inception of the court. And the way US presidential politics works means that the country can end up with a president the vast majority of people didn't vote for, but who still gets to nominate judges. Take President Donald Trump, loses a popular vote by a margin of 3 million, ends up nominating 3 justices in 4 years. In fact, with the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett, the Supreme Court ended up with a 6-3 conservative majority, even though Republicans have lost the popular vote in 6 of the past 7 presidential elections before 2020.
The Supreme Court decides larger sort of philosophical and theoretical issues that affect our country. So certain cases that will likely be relitigated are a woman's right to choose, how we treat immigrants, those who are documented and also those who are undocumented, whether or not we uphold marriage equity, that's LGBTQ plus rights.
This is a pretty big deal, especially since the Supreme Court judges are appointed for life in the US. Now, some may point to landmark cases to show the Supreme Court has made progressive rulings in the past. Take Brown versus Board of Education, which ruled that racial segregation in schools is unconstitutional, or Obergefell versus Hodges, which legalized same-sex marriage nationwide. But that's not always the case.
Among progressives, I think we have this vision of the courts as being an institution that grants rights. But over the last 40 years, I think we've seen a hard turn to the right from the court, where they have regularly sided with corporate interests over personal interests.
Take the Supreme Court's Citizens United ruling in 2010. It essentially allowed the super wealthy to secretly funnel money to political campaigns with no oversight or disclosure.
Rights are for people, not for corporations.
In 2018, the Supreme Court upheld voter purging. Voter purging removes citizens from voter rolls and disproportionately impacts people of color. And of course, there was this.
Tonight, for the sake of our unity as a people and the strength of our democracy, I offer my concession.
The Supreme Court settled Florida's election recount dispute in the 2000 presidential election. The 5-4 decision awarded Florida's 25 votes in the Electoral College and the election itself to Republican candidate George W. Bush.
The Supreme Court is meant to be an apolitical branch. Chief Justice John Roberts said this at his own confirmation hearing.
It's my job to call balls and strikes and not to pitch or bat.
We're neutral. observers and we just call them like we see them. That is belied by how the Supreme Court actually operates.
Supreme Court decisions have contributed to increasing polarization of US politics over decades. Voters are increasingly aware that winning court seats is a partisan election priority. Take a look at this exit polling from the 2016 election. It indicates the president's ability to nominate a Supreme Court justice was an important factor in backing Trump. We can also see how Democrat and Republican voters are increasingly divided on their views of the Supreme Court. This partisan gap is the widest in decades. So, what impact does partisanship have on the Supreme Court? We know Supreme Court justices have said they're above politics, yet their voting patterns tell a different story. A 2018 study of 8,500 Supreme Court cases since World War II found a judge's ideological beliefs matter twice as much when it comes to a swing vote. The nomination and confirmation process of justices is also a gigantic partisan battle. Senators who make the decisions are guided by their own political interest in tilting the court one way or the other, and seem less inclined to even pretend otherwise. Like when the GOP-led Senate wouldn't even consider allowing Obama to nominate a judge near the end of his term and blocked it by saying,
"Will we allow the people to continue deciding who will nominate the next justice, or will we empower a lame duck president to make that decision on his way out the door?"
Yet, they rushed to appoint a new justice just weeks before the 2020 election. That's despite most people in the US wanting the winner of that election to pick a justice.
The Supreme Court increasingly is being seen as inseparable from politics because the American people are seeing the lengths that the Senate is willing to go to try to put people on the bench that they hope will rule in line with their political wishes.
Trump fought for nominations of Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. All three are ideologically conservative judges who are also originalists. Originalism is the idea that we should interpret the Constitution with its original meaning in mind. You see, SCOTUS was created over 230 years ago by a handful of wealthy white men. But one of the main concerns isn't necessarily the age of the institution, but the
interpretation of the Constitution. That really comes down to the types of justices that we're putting on the bench.
Originalism is an interpretive method, but it's become a political code word. For Republicans, originalism now indicates a conservative judicial leaning. A survey shows that 2/3 of Republicans say SCOTUS rulings should be based on the Constitution's original meaning. In contrast, 3/4 of Democrats say SCOTUS rulings should be based on what the Constitution means in current times.
So all those very close cases that we've seen in the past, like for example, the gay marriage cases, that was a 5-4 case. The most recent case upholding an abortion law was a 5-4 case. So in a 6-3 majority, you can kind of kiss a lot of those cases goodbye, and you will start to see in your everyday life just how conservative justices play a role in how you want to live.
So, what happens now? The systemic issues with SCOTUS predate Trump, but his presidency has accelerated calls to reform a core institution in the country. You may have heard this idea come up during the election campaign.
Let's talk about packing the court then.
Pack the court?
They will pack the Supreme Court.
Keep in mind, the Constitution doesn't set a specific number of Supreme Court justices. But since 1869, there have been 9 justices on the Supreme Court. So, court packing is a process that would increase the number of justices on the bench to as many as 15. And some scholars argue that it would make the Supreme Court fairer. But to even consider court packing, the Biden administration would need to take control of the Senate, and that hinges on runoffs in Georgia. Others, including justices, have suggested introducing term limits.
At the core of the importance of term limits is really to update the court to reflect modern life.
But is it time for people in the US to change how they view SCOTUS in the first place?
One silver lining, I think, is that Senate Republicans really overplayed their hand. I think that they're used to people on the left not really paying attention to the courts, not really being engaged in what happens with the judiciary, but that's all changing this year.
SCOTUS is a flawed institution that operates in a bigger flawed political system. And that's why the renewed conversation around SCOTUS is really about a larger structural reform to make the highest court in the land more representative and democratic.
But if the court, the judiciary, can better reflect the populations that it serves, it will continue to have legitimacy and people will be able to trust it.